You know, I don't know why I keep that intro around. It always gets claimed, not by Universal Studios, but by a band that themselves sampled that intro. It's always a huge pain in the ass, but it felt apposite. Today, hello lovelies. So I'm going to bracket today's comment, replies and interaction with the audience with a couple of pieces of heavy shit, so be warned. It's the last day you can order white poppies from the Peace Pledge Union. So they give out white poppies every year. You can order them from their site. You know, November the 11th is coming up, and after that it'll be International Men's Day soon enough, so you know that's on the way as well. But the white poppies are presented as an alternative to the red poppies for Remembrance Day. The white poppies are intended to commemorate people who died in conflict, but with a focus on achieving peace and challenging the way that we look at war. Unfortunately, over the last quite a few years now, the red poppy has become more and more associated with jingoism and veteran worship and so on, and I don't think that's particularly healthy. It makes me reluctant to have anything to do with the red poppies, but the white poppies allow me to commemorate in my own way, with more focus on peace. And looking at the world today, we could use a lot more of that kind of attitude, I think. I'm not a pacifist to the extent that the Peace Pledge Union is, but I like the white poppies. You may have seen me wear them before, previous years, or in the Tabletopless stream last night. Alright, moving on. On the safety tools video, so a bit of a blast from the past, Elise Lapuce says, censorship when not done by the state in regards to putting people in prison from speaking about their ideology is something we all do naturally, even within ourselves. I don't blurt out every weird thought I have, or else I couldn't function socially, at work, in public transit, etc. Fearing censorship is, for lack of a better word, immature to say the least. Every aspect of our lives have some censorship in them, and that's absolutely not a bad thing at all. As TTRPG is a collaborative storytelling game, you play with other human beings. Can you play harmoniously without self-censoring? Now, it's immensely funny to me that people who get angry at other tables or players and their need or want of safety tools are the first ones to claim style of play differences, and sometimes it's just not a good fit. Let people play how they want, be it with or without safety tools. What does it matter? Sometimes something existing... no, that doesn't make sense, that sentence. Okay, I can't make sense of that sentence. Some people are eating cake, they don't want any part of your pie, and that's fine. I know a huge online community of women, queer and BIPOC players that won't touch a table with a pole if there's not some kind of virtue signalling or safety tools. And good for them, they're acting in their best interest. And in the end, it's their choice. Furthermore, it saves everyone the hassle of trying a few sessions and then having to quit a game, finding a new group, having a player leave and filling the spot narratively or with a new player. As a DM, I prefer kicking a player or having a player leave before session 1 or further down the line. So it's win-win-win. Okay, I wanted to say that comment in full apart from the bit that didn't make much sense. So to an extent I agree. Censorship is any suppression of speech, whether it's good or bad, whether it's overreach or not, is where we have the disagreements and discussions, right? But I don't think it is really anybody else's place to impose upon others and to censor them. save when the things that they're doing, breach the level of the harm principle. I don't think it's immature to fear censorship, because as we grow older, our tastes mature and we are better able to handle material that perhaps children are less suited. So I think a desire for censorship is more indicative of someone's immaturity. They want someone, a parental substitute, to step in and control their consumption, while an adult doesn't. An adult takes command of their own input of material, stories, and so on. This would be almost a fair comment, though I would still disagree on the censorship issue, if the people who want these safety tools would leave everyone else the fuck alone. But they are incapable of doing so. They continually try to impose, either through social pressure or more formally by pressuring conventions, clubs, stores that host games and so on, to forcefully integrate safety tools into play that's on their premises or at their event or whatever. So it's not a matter of people doing what they want. They seek to impose it upon other people, and that is where we have the problem. Now, if anyone wants safety tools, that is useful, because it tells me they're not a good fit for my game and they can fuck off. So, we're agreed on some of that, but censorship is far more pernicious and dangerous than I think you give it credit for. And what does it matter? Why isn't it fine? Because this immaturity, this childishness, this unwillingness to tackle difficult subjects or interesting subjects and so on is to the detriment of role-playing as a hobby, as an art form, as a story. So it's a trifle pretentious of me, but I think of games as art, and I want them to be the best, broadest form of art that they can be. So obviously I'm anti-censorship. Also, you have to look at the history. Right, talking about Bedlam, Mercutio, who used to play in the Camarilla with me, says, yes, Bedlam. I'm historically aware of it, also used it for source material, and also unfortunate enough to have encountered it in-game with the Camarilla. Fuck you, Graham. Highest accolade I think I can get. R. Larkinson says, as a person who may know a thing or two about mental instability, I have to say your eloquence on this subject is more on point than many who I've seen try to pretend about such things. The part where you mention it's similar to a capricious god that can help or hinder conveying meaningless or sometimes prophetic visions, which could also be memories, is absolutely correct, as that is exactly what happens to some people affected by that form of psychosis. A well-executed video, and good enough to be a rough guide of sorts in some ways, for those who would dare to try and play a Malkavian properly, if they were astute enough to notice it. Well, I hope people were astute enough to notice it, and obviously I have my own mental issues, which I think makes my take on these sorts of things a little bit more nuanced and so on. I mean, referring back to the safety tools conversation, the kind of people that insist on safety tools would have a conniption at the idea of including mental illness in games, and I think it's somewhat surprising that Malkavians survived the cut into V5. So yeah, but thank you for noticing. Yeah, it's because I'm a loony, but there we go. On Guru Meditations, Joe says, you would be an amazing Andrew Tate. Grim Jim Barmy Army, where do I sign up? I've never been so insulted in my life. Let's call yourself out. Mr. Prickly says, you do have value and you do help people. You may not see it, but others do. As I've said before, I do a lot of stuff privately. Do a lot of work for charity, but then so do Jimmy Savile, I suppose. I like helping people. It makes me feel better even when I can't do things to help myself. And I will always lend a hand to a friend. And I make friends quickly and easily, but it leaves you vulnerable to being betrayed and used. But I'd rather be betrayed and used than have someone go wanting or not be there for someone. Sometimes I just don't have it in me to help people, and then I hate letting them down. So it's not an open invitation to come to me demanding help or whatever, but I just try and explain why I'm the way I am. Agrippa Albion says, I think that I and others see in you a fellow traveller, perhaps because you have similar problems and yet are able to do things on YouTube. Games master an 18 plus RPG group for an audience, write books, etc. Many of us, and myself too, are unable to work, maintain relationships, or function in society like normal people, or at least in a way that's acceptable to most. I can see why shitehawks like Mr. Tate and other cockwombles are attractive. It's pure desperation, or perhaps hopelessness, that drives the perennially, don't know why I have issues with that word, lonely to seek anyone that can make sense of all this failure and suffering. Yeah, it's like that cartoon, with difficult and accurate answers and nobody's queuing up, and easy and wrong answers and loads of people are queuing up. But people like Tate and so on predate upon people, I think. I mean, to some extent, I think he does believe his own bullshit. But I don't think most people really want to be like Tate. It's so shallow, it's so surface level. His success that comes on the back of exploiting people in a way that went out of style in the 80s, so why anyone still falls for it, I don't know. But it's got these surface trappings of success, and when you consistently fail and you feel so alone and left out, I think those shallow measures of success become appealing. But people want easy answers, and I'm just not someone you should come to, because my own life isn't great in a lot of ways. I struggle on, and because I don't have any easy answers. So, because there are no easy answers, almost everything has some kind of nuance to it. See, even the statement that everything has nuance to it. But there aren't easy answers, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, that's just the way life is, unfortunately. Judd says, I was expecting Amiga error handling tips next time, though I was an Atari boy, not an Amiga boy, so just like I was a ZX Spectrum and not a Commodore 64 guy. Oh, aging myself. On my old review of the Sabat book for V5, Rory left a couple of fairly long comments. I'll read the first one in full. So my big issue with the book was that it didn't allow you to play Sabat player characters, really. I mean, you could cobble it together, but... So Rory says, fundamentally no, I disagree with the notion that Sabat should be available as player characters. The premise of the core game, as you say in this video, is playing characters who are monsters but trying not to be. It gives them a track of humanity as a core theme to follow for your character. Sabat are characters that eschew all humanity, consider themselves to be superior to humanity, and rationalise this with their own mythology against the Elders. While the first release of Playing Sabat came early after 2nd edition, VTM, it was a controversial choice. They make great antagonists, but as protagonists they undermine the premise of the core game and cheapen the notion of trying to hold on to humanity. I have little time for players who want to play them in an immature way, frankly. Even if players are more considered in how they play, the usual way I see them being played is basically as anarchs. The shift to a conflict between Camarilla and Anarchs is much more thematically viable in my view. Keeping the Sabbat as mysterious, inhuman, and ultimately unknowable antagonists gives them more narrative power, in my view. I see them as the equivalent to Black Spiral Dancers, Nefandi Spectres from other WOD games. They hold important themes of what characters could become if they lose their fight to hold on to humanity. Also, while I think playing Sabbat is problematic, I have no problem with players wanting to play in a greater choice of clans. Uncoupling the Sombra and Zimitze from the Sabbat allows players the chance to explore their exotic natures while also maintaining the integrity of the core game's themes. So in all, I disagree with this review and its premise. Right, so Sabbat were a playable option pretty rapidly. The original Player's Guide to the Sabbat and Storyteller's Guide to the Sabbat made it possible to play Sabbat characters. Sabbat are fascinating because they embrace their vampiric nature. They reject humanity because they're not human, and so they take an entirely different path. They're also fascinating because they are religious fanatics, which puts them into a very different category to Anarchs, who are ideological and want to update the Camarilla to more modern notions of humanity. So that's an alien mindset to me, but it's one that I find incredibly fascinating. And their obsession with vampiric history and mythology is also interesting. But the most interesting aspect to me is that rejection of humanity and an attempt to find out what is a moral framework for a vampire, which is, a predator, or less charitably a parasite, that is fundamentally different in a lot of ways to humanity. That's interesting, that's deep, that's philosophical. You can't stop people playing any concept in an immature fashion, and I wouldn't want to. If people want to play games immaturely, that's fine. This whole complaint is a bit too pretentious for me. More options is better. And they just fundamentally failed to live up to the promise of the Sabbat from previous editions, or even to properly update what is going on with the Sabbat. They represent a genuine alternative, philosophically, spiritually, even, to the status quo, and not in the same way as Anarchs. So, I disagree. And taking away the option for people, more options is always better. If you didn't want to play a Sabbat campaign or have Sabbat characters, you didn't have to. But now people that do want to include that have a lot of extra work, right? And that's not fair to them. You can always choose not to do something, but it's better if people who want the option have the option. And that wasn't the sole premise of the review, but it was a huge disappointment. In fact, the lack of material in all of the supplementary V5 material so far is a disappointment. On an old video about the alleged Jewish porn conspiracy, Turkic Sayajin said, Cuck Kuma. I don't know whether that's meant to be a play on Chuck Schumer or what, but apparently commenting on porn is enough to make one a cuck and a Kuma. I don't enjoy cuck porn. So yeah, no. And I think any red-blooded male is some sort of Kuma. So yeah, I'll take it. Alright, so yeah, the Kalergi stuff, and then the end bracket of heavy stuff. Kalergi Nightmare of the Whites, which is a great username. Really lets you know how balanced this person's perspective is going to be. Says Euros cannot be superior because genetically they have more Neanderthal DNA than other races. But what if it is the Neanderthal DNA that makes us superior? Ever think of that? Supergas3612 says race mixing isn't a thing and is no threat to the future of the white race, said by a literal example of impurity and the consequences of race mixing. It's a peculiar obsession. We've talked about it before. This idea that I'm mixed race of some degree or other, or not white of some degree or other. I don't know where they get it from. Do I look that peculiar? Do I just not fit entirely into people's concept of what various races look like? How can you even tell? I'm usually wearing a hat. I've got long hair, beard. My eyes are usually hidden behind sunglasses. What are you talking about? It's always fascinating to me. Yeah, been mistaken for every race on the planet for some reason, despite being as white as the new Snow White isn't. Lots of people made the same comment on this video this past week. Well, this didn't age well. I don't know what they mean. Still, well, why didn't it age well? Has some new edition of practical idealism come out with a footnote laying out Kalergi's evil scheme, or not? Because otherwise, there's nothing to go on here. One of the people who said, "Well, this didn't age well, did it?" Is a sort of Romanian life coach. I think that's what they are anyway. Romanians suffer from a lot of racism when they come over here to the UK, and are constantly referred to as gypsies and so on. So, maybe people who live in painted wagons shouldn't throw stones. I don't know. Someone called Glenn Nauer got into it with me back and forth for a bit, and then said, fine, I'll bring evidence. Give me your address and I'll bring it over. Sure, right, I'm going to give my home address to Rando Calrissian, the peculiar online racist. Sure, I'm going to do that. I mean, it's better safe than sorry. When I used to get threats from Islamic fundamentalists online, I did manage to trace one of them, and it was a 14-year-old boy living in the suburbs of London, and his mum wasn't best pleased to find out what he'd been up to on the internet. So watch yourself, Glenn. Use a random string of letters and numbers, who doesn't have a username, says, this man has no culture of his own, no spine, no soul, just a waste of oxygen and a wasted life. Your ancestors were the same as you, low IQ, no backbone, doesn't stand for anything, degenerate. Well, my IQ, when last measured, was in the 140 to 150 range, which is pretty high, if you put any stock in that sort of thing. I'm capable of standing up, so definitely got a backbone. I stand for many things, which seem to be diametrically opposed to the things that you stand for, because you're a fucking idiot. And degenerate, I get called problematic as much as I get called degenerate. Given that degenerate art and degenerate science kicked the Nazis' ass, I'll take it. So Raphael said, Europe must accept diversity while Israel genocides its diversity. I don't think there's a genocide going on, despite all the nastiness and everything. And Israel has an Israeli Arab population, and Gaza isn't part of Israel. So, you could say that they're engaged in a genocide, but they're not engaged in a genocide against their diversity. They're not killing off or deporting Israeli Arabs. Gaza isn't part of Israel, and while, as I said, things going on are horrible and nasty, it's just not a genocide. It's horrendous, but we should reserve genocide for actual genocides. And that's the end bracket, I guess. When I first commented on the situation in Israel and Gaza, it was just after the attacks on Israel. And so Israel's response hadn't really started yet. And so people were giving me shit later on without bothering to note when it was recorded that I was just sort of mindlessly supporting Israel. Now, as we've seen from the Kalergi comments, I weather a lot of anti-Semitism online, despite not being remotely Jewish. So that lets me see, to some small extent, exactly how much shit actual Jewish people have to put up with online. Doesn't excuse anything that's going on or that's being executed by the Jewish state, but it is it's heavy shit, and it would grind on people, I would imagine. Yeah, it's an issue, and I have been particularly disgusted by the way in which, again, my tribe, the political left, has been completely biased in how they have looked about what's going on. Your borderline anti-Semitism or out and out anti-Semitism amongst a group of people who, even the new left is supposed to be, virulently anti-racist, but apparently that doesn't count for Jews. And this makes me horribly, horribly uncomfortable with the way everything has been going. The actions of the Jewish state do not reflect upon all Jewish people. As one of Rutger Bregman's commandments, which is temper your empathy and train your compassion. And I think this is a great example of that. With empathy, we can understand the position of Israel, of what was done to their people and why they are lashing out in the disproportionate, even cruel way that they are. There's a whole bunch of other things going on politically and geopolitically, but I think we can look at what's happened and we can empathize. And the reaction that Jewish friends of mine have had has in some cases been shocking, but then I'm old enough to remember what things were like in 2001 and how Americans reacted to 9/11 and the cruelty and nastiness that went on back then. With empathy, you can understand that reaction. People's desire for revenge, to visit the same cruelty upon others that has been done to them in spades. But that's partly why empathy is something that shouldn't be celebrated or elevated as much as it is, because it ends up excusing these kinds of horrible actions. Whereas, if we look at it with compassion, we can see that, this cycle of violence isn't going to be stopped by what Israel is doing, that most of the people in Gaza have nothing to do with this and don't deserve what is happening to them, and that the better course of action would be a more muted, tactical, precise sort of response. But through empathy, we know that that's not going to happen. The moment those attacks happened, all the rest of this was pretty much inevitable. And the only way it could have been stopped is if Israel actually had a leader, rather than a right-wing populist. And that's just not the case. And the same thing in regard to Gaza or Palestine as a whole. So I just think it's the whole thing is tragic. I am disturbed and horrified by a lot of the anti-Semitic feeling that is going around, and a lot of the racist anti-Arab feeling that is going around. And yeah, and I experience some of it because people mistake me for being Jewish or whatever. And that's some tiny fraction of the hate that I know that Jews are getting, that I know Arabs are getting. And it's just horrendous, especially because a lot of that hate is coming from people who spend a lot of time preaching against hate. And I cannot abide hypocrisy. But yeah, so I'll leave you on a downer. Yeah, hope you have a good weekend. Zang.
There's a magical time on the cusp of true adolescence where you're no longer quite a child and not yet an adult. A time where the confidence of the teenager and the wonder of the child combine in a surge of optimism, hope and imagination to make some of the most important moments of our lives. There's a rich vein of films that tap into this time. These are the films where the kids save the world, find something fantastical, or solve a problem that the adults can't or wouldn't even believe existed. Some of these are fantastical, some are not. Some are a loving homage to the older versions of the same sorts of stories. If you like The Goonies, Super 8, The Monster Squad, or Explorers, this is a game for you and your kids. Available at post-mort.com and drive-through RPG.
It's a demand to